So is that rolling yet or not rolling?
Yeah.
And
rolling.
and I put this a little higher because I don't have a good way to put it lower necessarily. I don't know if that's good audio or bad audio or whatever. Okay, cool, perfect.
You power it down, and I'll put it away tomorrow morning.
Sure, yeah, totally can do that. Have that. Oh, I don't even know how to power it down. I'll just unplug it and close it up and call it happy, man. So yeah, it's perfect. So. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pray, and we'll get underway. Jesus, I thank you again for the opportunity to meet with these guys and to look what your word says. And really, we're kind of transitioning now more for the next couple of modules at least into eldership particular and looking at deacons as well a little bit in there. And, even though it may, look at this particular corner of the world, eldership, if there's anything that's true, that these qualities are really to be true for all Christians. All believers are to want to see these things manifest in their life and to be in a pursuit of you in such a way that these things are true. So I pray whether we're looking at eldership or not, we would just simply look as Christian men and Christian women and say, oh, wait, these are things that are valuable to the kingdom and they're dear to the heart of God. And so, Jesus, we just want to absorb it in those ways. And so I thank you for tonight and this opportunity. And again, I thank you for your grace that is given to us so freely. We love you in your name. Amen. Hi, Tim. All right, so the packet is fatter than it needs to be, and there's a reason. It's actually 2 modules, and it's also a self-evaluation test that we have. So really, when it's all said and done, we're going to go from page 92 only to page 100. So it's not like we're trying to tackle this whole packet, but I bundled them together more tightly and just had them all printed off because really these 2 packets or these 2 modules are not only intimately linked, but these 2 really represent kind of the catalyst for Praxis, right? So if I go way back to 2009, where it really found its genesis, it was this kind of material here that we really were working through. So if I go into the way back machine for a second, the church was unfamiliar with what New Testament eldership is and what New Testament deacons are. They were unfamiliar with this idea of qualities or qualifications of eldership. And so we just had to kind of work through that at that point, it was the Board of Stewards. It was just as it was starting to unlearn parliamentary procedure and all of that. So all that, we were getting rid of the bogged down nature and everything else and just trying to get to the raw essence of what is expected of New Testament leadership. And so this is sort of the distillation over the next few weeks of that study. We just did it collectively as a group for about 12 months. So I would just write out or kind of give them all the verses and say, what do you think this is saying? So it was kind of that raw. And then from that, we were able to unpack these other ideas and kind of build a structure around it and that kind of thing. So that's the heartbeat of all of this, and it's just sort of developed from there. So there at the top of page 92, there's a diagram that I think we had in the very first module. And again, this is just kind of giving a sense of how we see the structure. We don't put it as a hierarchical pyramid. We blow it off to the side. But the 3 circles represent the Trinity. But then when it comes to the church unique, this kind of helps us understand the flow of the connection through it. So Jesus, of course, is the head of his church. So he gave himself for it, he purchased it for himself, and so he is the one who runs his church. But then next to that, what Jesus commissions is elders, right? So we'll spend a lot of time looking at elders. From there, elders deploy deacons. And we'll get into kind of the difference between elders and deacons and maybe even at Redemption how we choose to deploy deacons. After that, we have members. And the members, if you remember back, do play an important role in affirming an elder. When they go through the Praxis material and the team of elders say, hey, 100% we think this person's meant to be an elder, then the members do step in and they have to affirm that person to be an elder, and it's a 90% affirmation. And so they are playing, the members are playing a valuable role in that affirming process of an elder, as well as the members they authorize like changes to bylaws and things like that. So they legitimately impact the most important elements of how Redemption's organized. It's leadership and it's governing documents. Those 2 things the members play a dramatic role in for those 2 purposes. Next to that, for members, we have the congregation, right? And that's, we don't really look at, oh, there's members and they're the elite ones and then there's the congregants and that's everybody else. It's just kind of in the structure of it. If somebody says, I don't feel led to be a member, I don't want to be a member, not interested in being a member, obviously just what that just means as it relates to the structure is they don't have the affirmation voice in the affirming of elders and the changing of bylaws. And then last, we put the world in there because we're always going back to why is the church in the world? It's to help reach the world. It's for the glory of God and the good of people. And so this is sort of the way we see New Testament church structure: Jesus, elders, deacons, members, congregation, world. And it's not to say because of that structure, elders are more important than congregation. It's not like that. It's just kind of the way in which we understand how we put things together. So kind of from that perspective, this begins to unpack at least the Jesus, elders, and deacons element of this particular portrait here. So we're going to start with the senior elder, and what we see there is the Bible recognizes only one, in your blanks there, senior pastor. It recognizes only one senior pastor, Jesus. I know you hear that around here, and you've heard it probably in other places. I was first kind of exposed to this 25 years ago. I was connected to a lot of guys that helped John MacArthur start the Master Seminary, and that was the first time I had ever heard, like, hey, this whole idea that in the New Testament, the only senior pastor you ever see is Jesus. Peter's never called a senior pastor. Paul's never called a senior pastor. They never used the term senior pastor for human beings. You see here in 1 Peter 5 that Jesus is called the chief shepherd, and that's the very essence of a senior pastor. It means ruler or senior or chief, and then, of course, shepherd. And it's also said of Jesus in Hebrews that he is this type of chief shepherd. And so we don't take that lightly. We think it's important to always maintain the idea and the sense of things in the church that it really is Jesus' church, and therefore there's no one person in the church that's really meant to be in charge. Because of that, that drops us down there toward the bottom of page 92 then, the elders plural. So Jesus is the only singular in control leader of his church, but then what Jesus then commissions underneath his leadership is this plurality of elders. And so number one in your notes, Jesus, the senior pastor of his church, shepherds his local church through a plurality of human elders. You'll notice there, Titus 1:5, it says, this is why I left you in Crete. It's Paul talking to Titus, and he says, I left you there in Crete that you might put what remained in order and appoint elders, plural, in every town, singular. So that may seem like maybe not terribly profound, but you have to recall in some church governance structures, it's the senior pastor, right, a human being, and then sometimes it's like there's the senior pastor, and then he's got his sphere of authority, but then there's this board of something, stewards, elders, deacons, whatever it is, and it's kind of a balance of power kind of between this human senior pastor and this board. And then you might even have over here something like trustees. So they control the money, they control the kind of the legislative side, and then this guy controls an executive kind of thing. But it gets kind of fractured or splintered, or there's a certain bureaucracy that happens, or a lot of game playing that goes on. In fact, back at Duval Church, that's the way it was built. So, for example, when I came to Duval Church, I was the senior pastor, and I was endowed with a high level of power there. Now, the board could stifle that, but I was endowed with a high level of power. So the first thing I sought to do was bring those two things together into one thing, and then get rid of that label completely. And by the time I got there, the trustees were token. The board was really controlling the money more than the trustees were, but eventually it all ended up absorbed, and we just said, okay, we need to go to this basic model of one team of elders of plurality, because again, a church in a town had that group of plural elders. It wasn't just create one elder for the church called a senior elder, and then a bunch of underlings. It's always a collective whole. So what's important to us is always having that plurality. Based on that, going up to the top of page 93, number 2, elders are described with 3 different titles in the New Testament, right? Elders are described with 3 different titles in the New Testament, each articulating various aspects of the same office. So I'm going to do something really quick. Or Eric, could you do me a favor really quick? Would you go in the other room over there and just see if you can find like a napkin or a paper towel in one of the cabinets or something like that? I'm realizing like I think the eraser's vanished around here. But I think this is helpful because sometimes it's like, well, what's the difference between an elder and a pastor and those kinds of things? When we look at the New Testament, we just simply see that those are all different words, but they're describing the same person. So for example, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a son, but I'm still the same guy. I just have these different descriptions of who I am. In the same way in the New Testament, we see here there's some passages, Acts 20:17 and then 28, or 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. You see that all of these words are used interchangeably. Thanks, man. I don't even know if I'll use the board or not through the night, but I'm like, it doesn't help to get painted into a corner right off the bat. And this board is terrible. I'll tell you what. So there, for example, number one, elders, that's presbyteroi. That's the plural form of it. And that really is talking about like a spiritual maturity. So when that particular word is used, presbyteros is the singular, presbyteroi is the plural. That's really dealing with kind of that spiritual maturity aspect. When you get to the word episkopoi or episkopos singular, that's more of the leadership kind of responsibility, the oversight, managerial aspect of perhaps what we call elders generically. And then you have the poimen, which is the shepherding aspect, the care, the protection, those kinds of things. And so again, when we talk about eldership in the New Testament church, even though we're using one of these words dominantly, all three of these words are true of every person that's serving on that team of leaders. They're all to be, helping with the spiritual maturity of the church, with the leadership of the church, with the care and the protection of the church. All that's to be true. And so, again, like in Acts or in 1 Peter, I'll use the 1 Peter one because it's a little shorter, but he's writing to the elders who are among you as a fellow elder and a witness of Christ's sufferings, as one who will also share in the glory to be revealed. He says, shepherd God's flock under your care, serving as overseers. You see all three words just operating in concert in that section. Same thing with the book of Acts. And so what that means in our context is that Steve Rutherford and Tom Potter and Sterling Monroe and Scott Thompson and Trent and myself, we're all just elders. They're all, honestly, all elders are pastors and pastors are elders. We've tried to simplify here a little bit the vernacular. So we talk about the team of elders, but then we talk about the paid guys as pastors. That's just to make it easy when it comes to nomenclature. But from a technical perspective, I would say Steve Rutherford's just as much a pastor as I am. Tom Potter's just as much a pastor as I am. I'm just as much an elder as Sterling Monroe is an elder, right? We just break that out a little bit differently, and that breakout is number 3 in your notes. Plural eldership can be a mix of pay and lay pastors, right? Or paid and lay elders. The reason we do it is 1 Timothy 5:17 and 18, let the elders who rule well be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in preaching and teaching. For the scriptures say, you shall not muzzle the ox while it treads out the grain. The laborer deserves his wages. And so what we do as a church is we're saying, okay, there's some elders here that we pay not because they have more authority and therefore we pay them. It's that they have either a unique gifting that can be leveraged that way. They have a unique amount of knowledge or experience in that area. And so they can bring to the table in the eldership this idea of leading well. They understand the environment of the local church at such a level that they can, when they devote their time to it, they're working from a wheelhouse that they're very familiar with or gifted in. And so we free them up to that purpose, right? So what we have there then with that rule well, or literally to stand first, is we have firsts or firsts among equals. So myself, Scott, Trent, eventually a future student ministries pastor, those would be sort of like the firsts among the equals of the eldership team. So kind of what Andrew and I were talking about before we got started tonight is Steve Rutherford, for example, is going to look at me and say, listen, here's what I know about Matt Boswell. He understands the dynamics of church ins and outs on a daily basis better than I do. I understand how to build trucks and trailers really well. Matt seems to understand the Bible well, and Matt understands how you lead a church like this well. So there's a lot of times he's going to look at me and say, all right, Matt, what do you, tell us from your expertise or from your knowledge what we should be thinking about here, or what should we expect, or what are some ideas that you think we should implement? And then I share that, and then Steve and the rest of the board can listen to that and say like, hey, that's a good idea or a bad idea, or what about this or what about that? So they're letting me function from my strength, but my strength isn't more authority. It may be more influence. It may be more knowledge, but it's not because, well, because I know this stuff now, I'm telling the rest of you guys, this is what we're going to do. This is what makes a church grow, or this is what makes a church tick, and we're just doing this. It's really more they let me function in my strengths. I'm a first on certain things, but there's other things I am not a first on. So when it comes to the worship arts, Trent's more the first among equals than I am. Scott is this tremendous administrator, and he's very outreach oriented, and he has a passion for evangelism, so he becomes the first there. Tom Potter is kind of the sage of the group, and there's times where we'll all be racing down the road and it'll be like, wait a minute, I've been in the church for 50 years, and can I tell you, that's a dumb idea right there. And suddenly we're all like, oh, we got to listen to Tom. He's making a good point there. So at different times you have firsts, and in different capacities. And this is a little different than maybe some environments that talks about the first among equals. They'll say really there's one senior leader that's the first among equals. I'm saying there's different leaders at different times. They're the firsts within our eldership team. So we just sort of acknowledge that. What kind of keeps everything a bit more honest for us in relationship to that then is number 4. The ideal pattern modeled in the New Testament is that elders make decisions unanimously. So we look, for example, like at Philippians 1:27, where he talks about standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving together in the faith of the gospel. Or you go back even to the essence of the book of Acts, where there's a lot of this, they were of one accord, they really came together. This is something that we implemented a long time ago that everybody said doesn't work. They're like, no, you can't do that. You need to have whatever it is, a majority of the board, 75%, 66%, whatever they said, was needed is what they said we needed to do. And I was just really certain that this is a healthier way. And again, this is kind of a transparent talk too. So the first year I came to Duval Church, there was a circumstance in which it was like 6-4 decision, 6s win, the 4s just had to suck it up and walk out of the room and pretend like everybody was in agreement because, hey, a majority vote. And I could tell people were agitated, and it was one of those things where I'm not even sure the 6 were right, and that's when I kind of stopped and said, wait, this, now you're just asking people to go out and basically lie. Like they were supportive and they're not, and there's agitation, there's frustration, and you act like you have to make this decision tonight when we don't have to. And that was kind of the first time I said, I think we should work toward this idea of unanimous decision making. And it sometimes takes longer. And this is why we have something like Praxis even, and this goes back to what you and I were talking about, Andrew, there at the beginning. If you don't have people who already understand the qualities of an elder, they understand, oh, wait, we're like using the NASB here. So you're not to be pugnacious, and you're to have this even-keeled spirit, and your family is to be in order, and you've displayed that, and your life's in order, and you display that, and you're not looking to pick a fight, but you're looking to be humble. Like if you have those types of people then in an elder team, then unanimous decision-making works much better. If you have the person that says, my job's to be the devil's advocate, and I'm here to be pugnacious, and I'm just, I'm not necessarily a godly man, but I'm a big giver, and I've been in the church a long time, and that it ended up putting me on the board, then unanimous decision-making will be destroyed in that kind of environment. So the key part of the unanimous concept is truly godly people that are elders together who then understand the value of that unanimous decision-making. And again, for our context, I mean, we went through a lot of stress that kind of galvanized that idea between the denomination suing us and the church having massive debt, all these things back at Duval Church that, again, was the genesis for this. It forced us to go like, what really matters? And let's not pick silly fights, and let's not banter about silly things. And so even in the current context, there's going to be times, so I can help you understand how the unanimous concept works. It's not like we all sit around the table and go like, yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love that. Okay, everybody, yeah, loves it. And we're going to do that. Sometimes that happens. Other times it'll be, yeah. I don't know. And so we let the I don't know kind of say whatever it is and that kind of thing. And sometimes the I don't know will say in the end, I don't know, but I trust you guys, so let's move forward. Like, I don't have enough hang up here, then I'm going to say no. I love you guys. I trust you. You're my elders. You see something I don't, but it's not enough for me to dig my heels in and say, let's just wait for a while. And some decisions get made with somebody saying, I trust you, and so let's move forward. There's other times where somebody's going to say, I have a concern about this, and it's big enough that I want us to wait. I want us to give us a couple of weeks. Let's fast about it, pray about it, which is tools that we use as elders when we have a difference. And then we'll come back in 2 weeks, and see where things are at. And over the course of my time, I've seen times where that person will come back after 2 weeks and say, I'm totally good, I'm in it, right? I'll see after 2 weeks, 3 more guys come to the table and go, I'm with him now. Like I wasn't, now I am, I see more clearly. And so then then we're going to be back to fasting and praying again for another few weeks and meet again in a few weeks. We've had decisions go as long as 18 months before they get made because there wasn't a unanimous consensus on things. Now, the nice thing about those things that took a long time, they didn't require urgent decision making. So, it may have been a trajectory issue as far as like, hey, we want to focus on this or change that. I mean, even some of our discussions on like missionaries and church planters and what are the criteria we use for supporting people, and that was stuff that took longer because it was kind of a shift in everybody's thinking. So, that's where the unanimous thing, what's nice about it though, is it slows you down, which isn't bad. Patience is truly a godly virtue. We're going to learn about it in 2 Peter this week. Elders are to be truly patient, and so it kind of forces that upon you. But then the other beautiful thing is when you leave that room, you're in agreement on a decision, and to have it be 100% is really a pretty amazing thing. But it comes back to men have to go into this saying, I understand the qualities of an elder. I'm here to be a godly man, not to be a difficult man, not to be a bossy man, not to, do any of that. And I can tell you one of the places where I've seen that just work in a real beautiful way is there has been more than one time at the elder level, right? So you got all the guys sitting at the table and we're making a decision that negatively impacts that guy. So maybe it's a ministry he's been running and now we need to make a change and he's poured his heart into that. And we're like, yeah, that may need change. It may need to be outdated. Maybe somebody else needs to lead that. Maybe, and that's horribly awkward kind of circumstance, right? And yet what we've seen, is again, this person now suddenly has to think through like, okay, is it just my defensiveness I'm feeling, or am I resisting because I believe God wants me to resist, or am I resisting because it's personal? They have to process through that. The only time we would ever remove an elder from the table in a decision is actually only a paid elder as it pertains to them losing their position. So they can't say, well, I disagree, I'm not going to be fired here. You know what I mean? Like, or church disciplined or whatever else, right? So that is the only time that they're excused from the circle. But there's been times where we're just changing an elder's job description or ministry focus or responsibility. And this is why godly character matters, because they have to be able to separate their own personal emotion from, is God doing something? And like I said, there's been more than a few times where that's happened, and they orbit through. And there's been times, honestly, and I'll share this here in a few minutes, but there's been times where one will be really upset and really angry. It's like, we're not making any decisions tonight. That dude left hot. All right, we're going to be back together in 2 weeks. We're going to be talking and see where it goes. And every time, though, God just brings it together. And there's been times where an elder will come back and be like, you know what, I was mad, and I'm okay. I prayed. I get it. I'm with you guys. I see it. Let's go do that, And so it's a really cool thing when you cherish this principle. But again, it requires what we'll learn in the next module, those characteristics and qualities of an elder being clearly displayed in that person's life. Otherwise, it doesn't work so well. So, any questions on just that aspect of the plural side, the unanimous decision-making side, those kinds of things?
I missed one here under 3. It says these elders have more blank, but not more blank.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I skipped that. I apologize. So right under that rule, well, these elders have more responsibility, but not more authority. I didn't say it to fill in the lines. I think I said it just kind of quickly in passing. So the paid elders, they have more responsibility, but they don't have more authority. You could even say they have more influence or specialty, but not more authority. So, for example, if I was to walk into an elder meeting and say, we're making a staffing change, I don't have that authority. Now, I have influence and specialty, so I can say, hey, I'm concerned about this person or this circumstance, and I would advise we make a change. But then they're all going to be like, okay, so what are the pros and cons? Why are you thinking this? What is it? Have you tried this and this and this? So again, just kind of in the realm of transparency, when we went through making the change with Ryan Habig a few years ago, that was 7 months of elder process. And a lot of, I came and said, here's where I think it's stuck. And they're like, okay, well, here's what we want you to do. Do this, 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 and this with them. We're sending you back to go do that with him. Okay. And then we're going to have a lay elder meeting with him as well as a paid elder meeting with him to see if we can fine tune those things. And so then we meet again. And they're like, how's it going? I'm like, here's what I'm thinking. They're like, well, you got to go back and do it again. So there's a lot of that where I think as a paid guy, and with my personality type, I'm more apt to say, let's just move to the next thing so I can, it's gonna be tough enough, and you got other guys going, dude, we're gonna slow you down. You don't have the authority to just go do whatever. And by design, I mean, like I said, when I wrote the bylaws, I wrote that in there. I didn't want that authority. They'll listen to me, but I can't just unilaterally do anything, So the freedoms I have is I can pick my own preaching series, and I can do those things, but kind of bigger things of movement and decision making, nope, not if they have systemic impacts. So, yeah.
Kind of a two-sided question.
Hey, I pointed to him, and you jumped in.
Saw him in the
Okay, so my question is, so Alexander Strock in the Biblical Eldership book talks about the elders who rule well, and he says that in the context it is not comparing elders who rule well to elders who don't rule well, but is saying that all elders rule well, and the double honor is just about particular focus on the preaching and teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And so, does this first among equals, not really jive with things like Alexander Strock's interpretation of that? Or?
From what I remember back from reading his stuff, I don't think it counters it, and I don't disagree with him. I'm probably talking a little bit more practically than I am even as particular as, is this 3 things or 2 things? In other words, is leading well a thing, and then preaching and teaching kind of 2 subsets, but you could say they're 3 things, or is leading well purely proven in preaching and teaching and no other thing? And I'm more apt to say, leading well is generic, and then he kind of brings a specificity. You could say especially instead of more, that might be even a better rendering, is especially in preaching and teaching, but not only preaching and teaching. I do think that all elders need to lead well, but I do think that some elders are going to have a higher aptitude, for which then the collective board would say, this is why we're going to free these guys up, because they're just stronger in this way. So it may be in communicating, but I think there's other things too, maybe administratively as an elder, that they go, we're going to free this person up to network all of the servants of the church. They're really good at rallying people to serve, and we want somebody just 100% given to that task. Well, that's not preaching and teaching necessarily, but it's leading well at sort of a unique gifted level. And so I think it could fit in there. But I also think that with the first among equals, it isn't exclusively the paid guys that would end up being first among equals. There's other times where I go, right now Sterling is being much more of a first among the equals. We're following his lead on something, or Tom's lead on something. So I think that idea shifts around in a lot of ways too. Not everybody would agree with that. So if I go back to kind of your old stomping grounds in Mars Hill, Mark would be the first among equals, right? What I'm saying is, it's That's a static design, and we're...
Equals too loud.
He's the first. And then there's some other people below him that are equals. The pigs are more equal. But so that's more of a static model. I think ours is a dynamic model of the firsts are always moving around, you know. And that's going to come back to the longer an elder team is together, which is why we don't have term limits. The longer they're together, the more those strengths are felt and leveraged, and the rest of the team sort of lets a person run on their strengths. And so, you know, I mean, Sterling has strengths even like in the financial realm and, you know, what he does even professionally. So like in a conversation last night about some things, at this point we're all like, you're the guy that knows, you know, so you're running, we're following you on this. You know, whatever advice you're giving us, we're going to take that advice, we're going to do that. The rest of us have a collective ignorance on that. So that's, I think, what's true to it. There's going to be things that, again, in my world, it may be, well, theology or something about kind of how you manage a church leadership structure. They'll look at me and do it that way. But, you know, I think it's almost in the same way, biblical eldership in that book. It's just saying it differently. I think it's still saying that all of them have an equal authority, and sometimes one may be more influential than another, and that's when they're becoming the first. But that could be among all those guys. So, yeah. And then Andrew, you had something.
I rescinded my question.
You rescinded your question.
I have another question. In your missional leadership book, you talked about the context of double honor being like the Roman soldiers' pay scale was like there was a doubling of the pay scale.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about double honor, do we mean we actually have a pay scale that doubles the first among equals? Like
no, not like that.
Pay, or do we mean that double honor means they get the honor of eldership plus a doubling honor, which is an honor of being paid as well?
If I keep it pretty simplified, if I go back a little earlier in the chapter, it talks about honoring certain widows. And that has a financial, there seems to be some kind of financial taking care of them. And so he kind of uses this word as a financial leveraging point. And then he gets to these other elders, and the double honor is purely financial. I don't think it's any other type of honor. I think, which is why then he says, don't muzzle the ox while it treads out the grain. The laborer is worthy of his wages, and that kind of thing. So using our context, I have no more honor than Steve Rutherford or Sterling Monroe from what's meant by maybe spiritual honor, spiritual respect, honoring your elders, obeying your elders, you know, Hebrews 13. My double honor is purely related to I am financially freed up to exercise my eldership gift. And that's really as far as I take that double honor. Some people will take it further, and some people will do crazy stuff like, well, you know, if the median income of your community is 100,000, double honor is 200,000. I'm like, shut up. It's just meant to say it's a financial supporting of those elders. Yeah, and it wouldn't go any farther than that. Mm-hmm. Yep. Cool. All right, then we'll look at the elder singular. And this just comes back to, again, sitting around the table. What is going to be true of any one elder? This is just things that are going to be important. Aside from the qualities that we'll get into next time we're together, we'll actually look through 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1 and all the different qualities. But we'll start to dip in a little bit here. The first, number one, an elder must be drawn to eldership. This idea of, this is a saying that's trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. That word aspires, or geo, it's like a hand is grabbing a hold and pulling you toward it. That's the idea of the word that's used by Paul there. And then desire is part of the word form here is where we get like thermal or thermos, or it's this idea of hot passion. You know, I feel drawn to this, I feel pulled into this, and it just kind of burns in me to do this. So this is why as a church, we have no aggressive recruiting structure for elders. We're like, if you desire it, you should come tell us. More than we're like, hey man, you should really be an elder. You got to be thinking about this. We're going to meet every week for, you know, next 6 weeks, and I'm going to be trying to get you to buy into eldership. You should be thinking about this pretty heavy. I mean, there's times we're going to say to somebody, you know, have you thought about this? You might just think about it. We might go that far, but we have no aggressive thing because our whole thing here is a person has to have a sense of drawn to it. Now, I think different people feel drawn in different ways, so I'm not going to limit that to the call is always X. Because I think there's things in eldership, be it paid or lay, that are kind of a drag. Not every part of it seems like totally fun. It's like there's going to be some things that are kind of heavy. But ultimately, I think there needs to be this sense of, I'm compelled to this. I don't fully know why. I just know I feel led to do it, so I want to do it. And this is why I'm going to start going to Praxis, or I'm going to ask about how does one become an elder. And I say, great, you got to take Praxis, and that kind of thing. And so the first thing is always they must feel drawn. We're never going to put somebody on our board here, like I said for stuff earlier, like, oh, well, they give a lot, or they're real smart, or they're a good business person, or they're well known in the community. Those are all wonderful traits, but that doesn't mean those people should be an elder. In fact, sometimes distinctly that person probably shouldn't be an elder, And so it's always going to come back to one of the first things is, are they drawn to this? That's the first thing. The second thing, number 2, top of page 94, is an elder must be gifted in eldership. What I mean by this is like this passage here in Ephesians chapter 4, right? It's talking about how Jesus and the Father has given gifts to men, and then he gave the apostles and the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds. Remember we talked about elders and shepherds and overseers are all the same person, just different words to describe the same person. Or Acts 20:28, the Holy Spirit has made you overseers. What we mean by gifted in eldership is we actually see eldership as a gift given to the church. So if a person doesn't have that gift of eldership, they shouldn't be an elder. So this is why we say eldership is not something you climb a ladder to earn in the church. It's qualities that you exhibit based on a gifting that you have, based on a passion that the Spirit is placed in you so that you're drawn to that task. So in that sense, it's less about whether an elder is gifted in mercy or giving or this or that. We actually would just say eldership itself is a gift in the church, just like all the other gifts we'd see in the New Testament. And so this is why at Praxis we don't build elders. I couldn't build a single elder in my entire life with 1,000 classes. It doesn't work that way. The Holy Spirit has to gift them. We have Praxis so those people that are gifted, they go, oh, wait, that seems like me. I'm going to go to that. I'm going to explore this more. Yep, I'm meant to do that. I feel like I'm meant to be an elder. And we're like, yeah, we see that too. You're already doing ministry and you're here and you care and you want to learn and you're exhibiting those things. And so if anything, Praxis is more of a washout system than a training system. At least that's how it was originally designed. It's kind of like Bud's training. By the end of Bud's, it's not like they're trying to take, 12 boat crews of 10 guys and make, all these SEALs. They're trying to figure out everybody who's never meant to do this. And they're trying to wash everybody out to get to who's really meant to do that. Praxis was sort of built like that. It was meant to say, because early on there was all this guy should be an elder, and that guy should be an elder, and she should be an elder, and it was all this stuff, and we're like, okay, we need a clearinghouse that shows people what it really is, and from that they see, I'm not gifted for that, or I'm not called to that. And so like the very first Praxis class we did was about 50 people, and at the end of that, I think we had 2 people become elders. So mission accomplished, so to speak. And of those 2, Byron Smith was one. I'm trying to remember. I think Keith McKinney was the other. So, and solid, wonderful elders. So they're gifted. We don't build them, but we do want to recognize them. So that's why, again, we have the tools that we do, which Praxis isn't the only tool we have, right? So there's sort of an entry level in the sense of you're already serving, and we note that. And then you take Praxis on top of that. But then like when we get into the evaluation stuff in the next module and those qualities, then we're measuring a person's life in alignment with those qualities and seeing, are they meant to do this? And then the elders are watching all of that. And then they come together and talk and go, yeah, that person's serving, they're great, and their family seems really solid. And we've talked to their boss, and we've talked to this person, and that's how we discern all of that. So, and all of that, if a person's gifted in those ways, those things are going to come together. Number 3 then, real quick, is an elder must be qualified, right? So if we're talking about drawn and gifted, The other part really is qualified, and we have the passage out of 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 2 through 7. And again, we're going to break that out literally word by word by word in the next module. We won't do that tonight. And again, I really, these are way more important to see as qualities in a person's life, as opposed to just checkbox, like, oh, I'm that, I'm that, I'm that. You're saying this is the fabric of a person. And under these qualities, not everybody's going to be perfect in every one of those things. So you're kind of looking for the mosaic of those qualities and not just a rigid kind of thing, because everybody's built a little bit differently. So, but they're still critical nonetheless. And then last, number 4, and I've already kind of hinted at this a little bit, but therefore what this all means is eldership is not earned, it's bestowed. And it's not bestowed by the elders of the church. Again, it's bestowed by God, and the elders of the church just simply recognize that. But I say that because what I even found early on in trying to move a church from non-eldership to eldership is there was people saying, well, that's not fair if it's like this. And, almost like they saw it as a ladder you climb, a thing you can achieve. And we're saying, and therefore they're like, it's not fair if it's only men. That's not fair. Why can't a woman earn that status? We're like, it's not how it's built. We don't mean it that way. It's completely different than our economic systems of the world that see upward mobility and you can become anything you want to be and all of that. We're like, no, this is just something that God bestows and gifts, and we just recognize it. So somebody says, how do I become an elder? I'm like, I talk to God. I couldn't tell you that, I can just tell you how we try to figure out who may in fact be an elder. So any questions or insights or concerns?
On part where it says elders are drawn, what do you do with, like in Titus where he says go and assign elders? Would you say that's just because that was unique church planning?
No, I still think it applies. So in other words, it's kind of like we could speak in the most generic sense and say, all right, I can go to the elders back in 2015, say, hey, I'm going to start Praxis in 2016, and the whole mission is to appoint elders. Mm-hmm. We're going to but who we're appointing is people that we discern are drawn, gifted, have the qualities of, and therefore the appointment of the elders is at 2 levels. One is the elder board itself saying 100% agreement on that person right there, and then the church and their 90% affirmation. That in tandem is then the elders and the church making that appointment. We could question whether the step of the members is a New Testament concept. I would say it's not. I would say the eldership itself has all of the New Testament authority to make that endorsement, the appointment of one who's gifted, qualified, called, all of that. However, I looked at kind of the spirit of Acts 15, even though I think, again, the whole church, when they said, hey, this is a great idea, they weren't in the decision-making process, but they had this sense of affirmation that was healthy. And the decree would have been the decree whether the congregation loved it or hated it, but they happened to love it. And I felt like, man, since elders are elders for life, we need to labor really hard to expose the elders to the church, to the members. The members go, we know this person, then we serve alongside them, we see their family, all of that, and therefore have them be a part of that affirming process. The elders are the clearinghouse for it, but I thought it was still important for the membership to play that role. I didn't feel it was necessary from a New Testament perspective, but I felt it was healthy in the spirit of the New Testament and the spirit of that one-mindedness to have that incorporated anyway, So, and what we found to a T is kind of the way the members have handled it is they look at the elders because they know the process and they know the people, and they go, oh, well, if you think they should be an elder, we trust you. So yes, I mean, it's pretty rare we see no's in the affirmation stage of the members. It's super rare that we do. So more on bylaw changes we'll see it than we do on elders. So, yep.
So I noticed most of the verses that we talk about and most of this stuff is focused on like the epistles, and it's focused a lot on it's focused a lot on like the 1 Peter and Timothy qualifications. Mm-hmm. But like Jesus in Mark 10 talks about like being the servant as being the first by being the servant of all, and do you think that if talking that we should take that into account for eldership as well? Is he talking about eldership, and kind of why don't we have that partially?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can. I don't know if it brings, this is going to sound terrible to say, I don't think it brings anything uniquely new to the table of the qualities or qualifications or expectations of eldership, because Jesus is certainly speaking to every Christian. This is what they should do. Every Christian should be thinking in terms of being the servant of all. You could say the apostles, had them in a pretty heavy-duty, regimented discipleship model to prepare them to be, in essence, the founders of churches that would inspire and call people to the exact same thing. So I think when I ended up putting this together, I went really to what I considered to be the verses that were most concrete to the leadership offices to even kind of get us realizing there was like a bigger picture where when we first started, people said, it doesn't really matter what you do in church leadership. And I was saying, no, there's a lot of verses that are directly about church leadership, and so let's look at those. And so that's kind of how that was born. It was less about the general truths of, Sermon on the Mount or, Mark 10 or any of those. I mean, even you can get into some stuff in like Luke 17. And so I just kind of went, no, let's go straight to the leadership passages, in part kind of to carpet bomb people to go, oh, there's lots and lots of stuff about how you run a New Testament church in the New Testament. And so those kind of cliche, well, it doesn't matter what your governance is, just as long as you love Jesus. Well, if I went with the verses that were just kind of loving Jesus, it was going to run me into a corner. So I'm like, okay, we're going to look heavy at then those epistle directives. But I don't think it sounds, like I said, it sounds kind of lame to say. It wouldn't hurt in any way to inject those other verses. But I don't think we lose anything by not injecting those, especially when you get into like the 1 Peter 5, where it's don't lord over them, those kinds of things. Even we're going to see, I think tonight, some stuff out of 1 Thessalonians 5 that's like really early eldership. 1 Thessalonians, well, actually, I think 2 Thessalonians was perhaps one of the earliest of the New Testament epistles, and 1 Thessalonians, I think, followed. I think it goes second and first. And yet that was still in the late 40s. So I think Paul, he's not really talking in terms of elders, but he's talking about in terms of the leaders of the church. You do this, 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 and there's a gentleness in there and things like that. So I think those things come out as it is. So, Any others? All right, so deacons then. Number one, deacons are servants by definition. That's just what deacon is. It just means one who is a servant, diakonos. And so because of that, because they're servants, we see number two, deacons are flexible by design. And I would say that's for us as a church. So in other words, we don't look and say, well, to have a proper biblical church, you have to have elders, and then you have to have, make these triangles, you have to have deacons, or you don't have a biblical church. We would say deacons are born out of need. So more than you better have them even if you have no use for them. We wouldn't do that necessarily. Some places do because they make them a part of the governance structure. We don't see deacons as a part of the governance structure. We see deacons as a part of the infrastructure of service and management and administration and those kinds of things. But we don't see them, again, as possessing authority that is inherent to the deacons themselves. That's why we say deacons are flexible by design. Takes us to the next thing, and I can kind of explain a little bit more. Number 3, top of page 95, deacons aid the elders as extensions of the eldership, thus freeing elders to shepherd in the word and prayer in particular. Not exclusively those things, but probably I'd say those are chief things that elders are supposed to do. And so in our case, for example, I think eventually what will happen is, let's see, like Christy, for example, will take the Praxis material and become a deacon. So right now she's the director of children's ministry, but we've talked, we're like, hey, we don't want you to do it right now because we know you're busy and you're just getting used to the job and everything else, but we want you to go through Praxis and we want you to become a deacon because we see your responsibility is at a level where we think that should be somebody who's an extension of the authority of the eldership in an aiding way, and we would want that to be true. We've already looked at her life. We see the qualities of the deacon in her life. We don't have any concerns about that, but we want her to go through the process. Reese is another one who's one of our deacons, and she oversees, the manager, the care of the bookkeeping of the church. She doesn't have authority over the finances of the church. She's an extension of the elders, and she aids the elders in them executing that authority. My wife's a deacon over women's ministry. So again, she's looking at the elders saying, what do we want to do as far as women in the church? What is the priority of the church? And she executes that vision of the church when it comes to women. So this is how a deacon would ultimately aid in the process of what elders are to do, so then elders can focus on their primary responsibilities as it pertains to the word, prayer, ultimate leadership and protection of the church, things like that. With that said, however, number 4, deacons must be qualified to serve as extensions of the eldership. So that's why, like in 1 Timothy chapter 3, deacons likewise must be. It's not optional. They must be these things. And that's because what they are doing is, because they're extensions of the DNA of the church, in some ways they are endowed with a certain level of sub-authority. So Reese also oversees hospitality. And if she's having a problem with somebody in hospitality, she's authorized, because of her responsibility, to be like, yeah, I need you to not do that anymore. That really puts people off. When you get angry when the coffee isn't ready and you're chewing everybody out, and she can say, like, we need a different thing on our team. So she can do that, but we need to then make sure that she's been vetted with certain qualities so she's not difficult and gossipy and all those kinds of things, right? So that's going to be important in the deacon realm. Or Sterling back in the day, he was a rare one in that he was a deacon before he was an elder. We don't treat it that way. We don't say deacons are a stepping stone to elders. We see them different. But Sterling actually started off as a deacon just because at the time, we like, this guy's meant to be an elder, but he was still pretty young at the time. But he was running our high school ministry at the time. So we're like, let's make him a deacon and let him give a little bit of years under his belt, have a kid, all those kinds of things. But again, he was executing the authority of the elders, but because he was doing that in student ministries, he had to have some level of kind of imparted authority and had responsibility to make decisions and that kind of deal. So because of that, they also need to be qualified or have these qualities that are similar to elders with exceptions. There's most particular is the ability to teach. You see that as a quality in elders that you don't find required of a deacon, but you do find that what's required of a deacon is that they have solid theology. So it's not like, we wouldn't say, well, deacons are just doers and elders are thinkers. It's not like that. Or elders are teachers and deacons, it doesn't matter what they believe as long as they work hard and they're honest. No, they actually have to be able to hold the faith with good standing and great conscience. So that's important on the qualified side of things. And so really what you have is, just as much as we talk about being complementarian in homes and marriages, right? So the husband has a role and the wife has a role. We see elders and deacons are complementarian. In part even, we see that the complementarian model of the home is kind of mimicked in that relationship too, differently, but it's mimicked. It's like a kind of echoes it or shows a shadow of something similar. So therefore they're all working together. So then even us as a church with elders and deacons is we'll do a meeting. We used to do them every 6 weeks. We haven't done them lately. It's been almost less needed. But we'll have certain meetings where we pull all the elders and deacons in together, because what we do find, since we have male-only elders, but we have female and male deacons, we find that there's a huge benefit and blessing to having those female voices in those meetings. So the elders and deacons together, the women are saying stuff that the guys sometimes just don't think about. Like, oh, that's a good idea. Oh, that's right, I forgot. Like, we get so myopic that women just excel at relationship, for example, and women excel at multitasking things. And so we'll be talking about the church is going to go this way, and then the deacons, who most of our deacons are females, will be like, well, did you guys think about this and this and this? We're like, no, we didn't. That's a good idea. We need to really think through that one more, And so we find that we get the best of both worlds. We honor the New Testament structure on leadership, and we also have the feminine voice at the table. And sometimes they make a really good case, and they're not claiming that they have the authority as deacons. They just make a really good case, and the elders go, that's a great idea. We didn't think about that. We should probably do that, or change that, or rethink that, or redeploy that. So it really is a pretty healthy experience that we have in that context. It's not on every decision, but there's just some things we'll all come together and say, how's things going to redemption? And some of the deacons will be like, we might want to do this and this. Like, oh yeah, I didn't even think about it. So very collaborative, very, very helpful in that sense. So any questions?
Do you think the role of a deacon is kind of, like the elders, do you think the role of the deacon is kind of a more long-term solidified role, or could you see where the elders temporarily deputize?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Like,
they could come and go.
Financial issues, let's kind of have it.
Yeah. Now that's why I go back to, it's kind of a, what did I call it here? Maybe flexible.
Okay.
Yeah. Because there's going to be certain seasons in the life of a church. Right. So, we've even had like the idea of saying we have people that take Praxis to be deacons and they may be non-functioning, right? They're just sort of in reserve, and then we can pull them out of reserve if we need them. So a good example of that right now would be a little bit like Michelle Rutherford, right? So she was the deacon particularly tied to children's ministry, and now she's not running children's ministry, and Christy's in there, and so she's kind of floating like, what's God have for me? Right now I'd say she's a deacon in reserve, So if we had something came up, we're like, oh man, we really need a deacon over this. We can see if her gifting fits that thing and then have her do that. So kind of deacons are lifers too, but they're not lifers always in function. They may be lifers in they're vetted, but we may or may not have jobs for them to do. And so that would be a good example of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Tim.
In Acts, I think 7, when they chose like Stephen
Mm-hmm.
and the other 6 deacons, the people chose them and like brought them to the elders. Do we see that as just like sort of that was right for the circumstance, but we don't follow that as a model, or is there something
Correct.
that we do differently for?
Right. Well, the way I think I handle the Acts passage there, I would call them, that's like a pre-deacon thing. So in other words, they're not really described as deacons there, but it's because at the same time it's like, well, they have to be filled with the Spirit, and there's these other qualities that we don't really see then as it unfolds later in the latter half of the New Testament. By filling the Spirit there, it seems more like miraculous filling of the Spirit, not just, hey, you're saved. And so we look at the Acts 6 passage as descriptive but not prescriptive. So it's like, oh, it gives us a good idea of kind of the early servants of the church, but then we dip into the epistles and use that more as the framework. So, yep.
So it's like same deal as elders, like we would want people who felt drawn to being a deacon, or do we?
Not
more,
yes and no. In other words, it doesn't specify that a deacon must have this, this desire and this draw and everything else. I think what it really would come down to is, we would even maybe go so far as to say, like I'm doing with Christy, I want you to go through this. I wouldn't do that so much with a person that may be a potential elder, but I would do that with a person that would be a potential deacon, or somebody's already serving something like Shane Bailey. He had started taking Praxis at one point, and then his life got crazy. But it was like, hey, you're doing a major chunk of what's important to Redemption Church. You really should become a deacon. Less about whether he feels called to, quote, the office of. It's more like he felt called to the task of. And so maybe that's a way I would kind of qualify that. It's just more like I have a heart for serving in the church, and I have a heart for serving big chunks or critical areas of the church that the elders need to sub out in some way. And so, okay, cool, let's find that person. But the members don't affirm deacons. So the elders just put them in. But we seek to do that based on they go through Praxis at least. Hybrids would be like a Christy, where she'll do it here down the road, but we put her in a position, even though we see that as a deacon level position, we're comfortable putting somebody in there that hasn't gone through the process just yet, as long as we see the qualities that we go, that would mirror that we're comfortable going down that road and putting a person in charge of something a little earlier if it's at that kind of level. So, yep. All right, so then the function of New Testament elders in the local church, what do they do? Elders, number 1, pray and promote the word. That goes back to that Acts 6, 1-4. Again, we're using that a little bit more as a descriptive more than prescriptive. But it was interesting, what we find there in the description of it is when it says it is not desirable it's almost saying it would be inappropriate or wrong for the elders to not fulfill their primary responsibility for secondary things. And so it even keeps kind of the elders in check too, to where they know, oh, this is what we're really meant to do. We're really meant to guard the church, and we're really meant to equip the church, and we're really meant to lead. They're servant leaders, but we're really meant to have that role as opposed to get bogged down in a lot of other mechanics that other people could do that have a different gifting. So we know that prayer and the promotion of the word is critical to what elders do in the local church. Number 2, elders receive giving and distribute funds, right? So kind of, again, using Acts, which again we use more as descriptive than prescriptive, but it gives us direction. We see that the church leaders were the ones that received money from, Corinth would send it to Jerusalem, or Philippi would send it someplace else, or whatever else, and then they distribute those funds as there was needs. That's why he even says that they sent it in the charge of Barnabas and Saul to the elders. So they saw the elders receive those funds, and therefore the elders would distribute those funds. For us as a church, then, what it means is that's why the members, we don't have them vote on budget. So the elders, they oversee the budget and they deploy the funds of the church and that kind of thing. But then as an accountability that we wanted in there, we said, hey, but we have all the books checked out by a non-Christian CPA, and that is reported to the members every year. And again, we did a non-Christian CPA, because now you have a non-Christian look at church finances. You want to make sure that's on the up and up. I mean, you don't want to be looking at your non-Christian CPA like, yeah, we know we're trash, that kind of thing. And the other part of it is, I'm not super critical of evangelical organizations that are meant to be the financial stewards of, but it's just kind of like the tail wagging the dog to me in some ways. Like, there's too many dogs in a similar fight for an outside evangelical source to be watching the finances of another evangelical source, and this one pays them to do that, and this one uses them as their, wait, we do the finances of X church and Y church, and it's like, it's just too closed, and so we wanted outside non-Christian to do that. And so it still honors the elders are able to, make decisions, make changes, have agility with the finances, but there is still transparency and accountability in a different fashion. The other part is, I think probably most of you know, but we have to go through that process within the first. Sometimes it's the CPA that takes longer than us. We get the paperwork in pretty quick, but they take longer. But we have to have that process underway with them within 3 months, or our budget. Our members could technically come and say your budget's frozen. You can't pay your pastors, and you can't do any of this because you haven't put forth the process of this outside accountability. So we built that into the bylaws too as an accountability for the elders. It says we always want to keep things transparent on the up and up, and we have a technical process for this. The only way that can be subverted, as far as not using an outside source, is the elders could commission 5 members who are not in leadership, who are not related to anybody in the eldership, to conduct an internal audit. And the only reason we put that trigger in there is if the church was so small and financially strapped that they couldn't afford the process. Because it's not cheap to have your books looked over and that kind of thing, depending on the scale in which you're operating. So we felt that at least it was important I go back years ago, I was in a small church, solo pastor, and they couldn't afford to have an audit, couldn't afford a compilation, so 5 members of the church took the 12 months of books and cherry-picked 5 months out and went through all the folders and made sure everything matched up, and they just did an internal audit, which there may be a time we say that's just good just to open up the books for members to do that process too. But that's the way we sort of handled that. So giving and distributing funds. Number 3, elders resolve doctrinal conflict. This is that section out of Acts 15 that I always appreciate. But they're trying to figure out, what do we do with the Gentiles, and how does that fit with the Jews and everything else? And so they go up to the apostles and the elders concerning the issue. So the Jerusalem Council was both apostolic and eldership in its orientation. So the elders were weighing in equally with the apostles on this. And so you keep saying the apostles and the elders came together and looked into this matter, and then it seemed good to the apostles and the elders, and then to the apostles and the elders and all the brethren, and then the apostles and elders again. So, what we see is that early on in the dynamic of the church, when there was some concern about trying to clarify what a theological issue was, or a problem, or whatever else, the elders played a significant role in that. The other thing you see is in verse 7, says, after there had been much debate, Peter then stood up, and then he gives his big speech. But it's the reminder that at the eldership level, whether it be leadership decisions or even doctrinal conversations, there may be much debate, and that's okay. I never want it to sound like the unanimous or unanimity aspect of elders at Redemption means that there isn't debate. There can be, and there can be genuine angry emotion at times. I remember early on at the start of Redemption, and we were kind of coming back around on women elders, and I had one elder, like, he's just like, "You're just a misogynist, and he just uncorked. I'm like, dude, what is that all about? But it was really good because he just had hit a frustrating stint there, and he was irritated by some things, and I was getting irritated, and then and it just kind of built up, and so there was some hearty debate, and nobody was doing it to play the devil's advocate. There was real passions there and real differences at the time, and so we had to reason together for a while and keep looking through it. And it was funny because I was reminiscing over that based on something that I had to do last week, and how he and I are on the same page now. And I was just thinking about how that dialogue continued on even outside of the elder meeting for a season. We were just bouncing emails back and forth. And, oh, this is what I mean by this. I don't mean this. I mean, oh, and you mean that. Oh, and so sometimes you find that it's just you're working off of different definitions of words, or you're coming from an angle that the other guy's misreading completely, And so that's, there was much debate and much passion and heat and friction and sparks. And then, we actually agree here and here and here. And then it all just kind of coalesced together and worked out great. But that's part of the resolving doctrinal controversy. Where it's a little different is sometimes you have newcomers to a church that come in with a crazy idea. We're not looking for a big conversation about that. That's just more stop with your crazy idea. You know what I mean? We can talk with you for 1 or 2 meetings, but then stop with your crazy idea and try to win them over. If not, then say, that happened this last week that made me think about this, where we're like, we just told them we would not be the church for you. I mean, you seem like nice people. We would not be the church for you. You're not looking for us. You're looking for Eastlake or something. You're not looking for us. That just sometimes happens as well. So I'll stop there and ask if there's any questions, since we were doing prayer, word, giving, distribution, and doctrinal controversy. So any questions before I move forward?
Just clarification. The doctrinal controversy passage has them going up to Judea from Antioch, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not really the local church. Can you just kind of clarify?
Yeah, no, and that's where I think it goes back to when we're dealing with Acts. This is why I always go back to descriptive versus prescriptive. But it gives us some pretty hearty direction on, like, even when we get later into Acts. So when we look at the Ephesian elders, you start to see a similar pattern, and there it's very particular church, and he's warning them, and we'll get into that tonight. Watch out for those outside, watch out for those inside. There's this protection of the church and that kind of thing. What's interesting about it is I think generically we could say it is the job of the elders because they're skilled in teaching. They're commissioned to be sort of the protectors of the tradition handed down, or what we would call the Bible then. Their job is to resolve those matters and to really say this is concretely the position we as a church hold. So forget redemption for a second. We'd say Timberlake should have elders, and their job is to say we're Arminian. That's what we are.
But why didn't they just solve this problem in Antioch? Why did they have to go to Jerusalem?
Because of, I think actually we would say it was social sensitivity honestly. Because the challenge is, what do we do with the Gentiles? What do we ask the Gentiles to do and to not do? And who's going to be most upset about it? Well, it's not going to be the Gentiles. It's going to be the Jews. So let's go to really where the church started. Let's go to where the epicenter of the Jewish church is and have that talk there, because the group we have to win over is not the Gentiles. We have to win over the Jewish church. And so we're going to do it there at the epicenter. Because in some ways, too, we'd have to say that James was really, I mean, who's the Pope? Is it Peter or James, you know? The Eastern church, the early church would have said James is probably the most critical leader to the Jewish church. And so let's incorporate them so that they can go, oh, this makes sense. And they have buy-in.
So do we do that?
No. Because we're too distant from that epicenter. I think...
No, but I mean, we don't resolve doctrinal controversy in a way that tries to be ecumenical, right?
Oh, right. Well, because I think part of it, too, is since it's early on, a lot of things weren't formed up. And so it's so infant in that sense that this was just a sizable shift, right? So they wanted a spirit of ecumenicism among churches that were already in agreement. Nowadays it's tougher because there's so many things we don't agree on that ecumenicism, to really accomplish it, is to water down everything. There was going to be a lot of agreement among the Jewish churches on a lot of things. Where they were going to struggle is, what do we do with the Gentiles? How do we incorporate them? Because we have all these dietary laws that we still exercise and we believe are right, and we get that maybe they're not, but we're not fully there, or we don't know how to be there yet. So in that sense, it's probably less ecumenical, and I think it's just more, how do we help the Jewish churches and the Jewish church serve their Gentile brothers now? I think that's probably more the identity of that. So, others? Andrew.
You may be dealing with this later on when we start talking about the qualities of the elders. How much leeway or bandwidth do elders have when it comes to doctrine? Because doctrinal controversy to one theological bent may not be controversy to another. You know what I mean? Like Arminian versus
Right.
Reformed. So
Yeah.
the elders within redemption, I know you're Reformed. Would you allow an elder who is Arminian, no salvation, perfect sanctification with it? I mean, you know, that
Right.
kind of thing. What leeway do you allow for?
I think there's room for some leeway, because I think there's two elements to it. And I think, and you're going to take everything case by case. So it's not as simple as, oh, well, I mean, I could sit there and say there's extremes that I can instantly say that doesn't fit, right? But I think there's nuances in there. And so that's where you're going to go back to, is this person aggressive with this, or they're humble with it? Is it going to be something that they're trying to force as a transformation of the teaching aspect of the church? Like, so all the elders know, like Matt, Scott, Trent, and the new guy we're looking at, they're all going to lean Reformed. Like, that's just kind of the angle we've taught on, or taken on the teaching aspect of things, right? So we kind of get that. But for example, Tom Potter is actually much more Arminian than he is Reformed, you know? But he's one of those guys that he's an Arminian that talks a lot about sovereignty and believes God's in control. You know what I mean? So then you start to go like, I think more than anything, more than him being a well-defined Arminian, what he is a guy who really grew dynamically and potently in his life in that Arminian context. And so it's always dear to him. But as he's gotten older, he's like, but I think God's much more in control than not. And no, I don't think people lose their salvation. And, you know, so it's sort of like some parts have worn off, but he may still keep the moniker. Well, I'm more of the Arminian guy here. But he's not mean-spirited about his position or trying to thwart the overall direction. So some of that kind of comes into play too. I think if you had somebody that was, I'm just speaking for me, I can't speak for all the elders, I can say as me sitting at the table, if it was somebody who says, nope, I'm hardcore, that you can be perfect in this life, and yes, you can lose your salvation for doing bad things and everything else, I would shoot that one down just as an individual elder. And it's 100% agreement for a person to be affirmed by the members, right? So if I'm not a good, it dies there, you know? So that's where, that's the interesting part, I guess, in some ways. Any one elder can kill a person becoming an elder, and if the opinion is that person is just going too far over the line, then for any one elder, you know, and they're all kind of different. So like when Byron was on the board, he's much more dispensational, you know, and I'm covenant. It was no big deal. You know what I mean? It was like, it's fine. Because a lot of those things are interesting discussions, but they shouldn't divide us. And I think that's what it comes down to. If somebody feels, no, my mission's to divide now, that's more than a doctrinal problem. Yeah. But it's case by case. So, yeah. Don't know what we'll do with Tim. I don't know. He's a Reconstructionist, maybe. I don't know.
You're supposed to divide the word of truth, right?
That's right.
You are supposed to divide.
You are supposed to divide.
Yeah.
Yeah, but some things we're less certain of than others. So, all right. So number 4, page 96, elders provide leadership and protection. So getting a little deeper into Acts where things start to form up a little bit more. Paul's talking to the elders of Ephesus. So again, a local church has plural elders, and what's he say? Be on guard for yourselves and all the flock. For after my departure, savage wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock, and from among your own selves men will rise up, speaking perverse things to draw away the disciples after them. So therefore, be alert. And you know, there's a number of things. Matter of fact, if you just turn the page, that we can break down really quick. But 4a, you know, he says, you know, be on guard for yourselves. You know, anything that's true about elders is that they're human, right? So elders can get into this, again, myopic vision of, well, because we believe in plurality and unanimity and we're all qualified to be an elder, we're inerrant. That's not true, right? So I think even as Paul's kind of opening this up, be on guard for yourselves, he's saying you have to even watch yourselves. I mean, this is what it goes back to. There are times where I'm really certain about something, and I think the church should do X, and you know we're going to drive it. And then I get into those meetings, and I'll have an elder who's like, "You're almost too caught up in that. Like you're so certain, but it just doesn't seem right. Are you okay? Are you struggling with whatever it is? Maybe it's just your own. You feel like, oh man, this thing should be bigger by now, and I need to force this, you know, forward. And so it's like we need to be on guard because sometimes elders come to meetings, sinful mindsets, sinful attitudes, selfishness, whatever else. And so it's a good reminder that we are not inerrant as soon as we come together as a group because we're a plurality. You know, we can be errant, right? So be on guard for yourselves. But also 4b, also we're to be on guard for the flock. And we do so not because just simply we have a responsibility to it, but I love the literal rendering of this passage. Says, and for all the flock, the church of God, which he purchased with the blood of his one. You know, it's like just this idea of what we care about is not growing our church or expanding the borders of it or, you know, having a, you know, I don't know, good marketing in the community. What we're really commissioned with is this is precious to Jesus. This is why we should be on guard and we should care. It matters to him and we love him, and so it matters to us, right? 4c, we are to be on guard by looking for what I would call corruption here. 4c is looking for corruption. You could put next to that external. So, you know, there's plenty of things that happen within the social framework of the United States right now that elders should be saying, hey, there's savage wolves out there that want to come in among you. They may not come through the front door. In other words, they may come via the internet. They may come via media. They may come via friendships or whatever else. But elders just have to be aware that what people in churches are going through in any given culture, when it's external destructive ideas or unbiblical ideas or whatever else, they'll have an impact system-wide if the elders aren't speaking to it or addressing it or trying to encourage or coach people through it. And so, again, this is part of the job of elders, is to say, what are things that we're more easily drawn into or we buy into that we shouldn't as a subculture or microculture or whatever else, and how can we teach to the contrary or encourage to the contrary and keep people kind of on the rails of Christ, right? So they look for corruption that's external, but then also 4d, we look for division that's internal. And more churches are damaged by internal division than external destruction, it seems like. So, and this is why he says, and you know, not only for the savage wolves that would come in from among you, but also from among your own selves, men will arise, speaking perverse things to draw away disciples after them. You know, church splits, it's a good example of it. Just people that come up with wonky ideas in churches and start to promote those in small groups and other venues, and email campaigns and phone campaigns, you name it, it happens. And so elders have to be aware of that. In fact, I was talking with somebody this week, or I guess it was yesterday, and I was making the point of how there was something that came up, and within about 5 hours, we called the person and brought him in. I was like, hey, did you say this and this and this? Like, because that doesn't seem healthy at all. It seems kind of divisive, and we were able to talk about it. And so this was a week and a half ago, and I kind of came back around yesterday, and I said, hey, just so you know, the reason I was so quick and so aggressive is I've concluded that if you wait 6 days, you'll have a massive problem, and if you wait 6 weeks, you'll have a super massive problem. And so we tried to not wait more than 6 hours, to address any potential division, not like people just having comments, but something that could be legitimately divisive. I find most churches kind of want to wait. It'll hopefully go away, it'll hopefully go away, it'll hopefully go away. And usually it just gets bigger more than it goes away. And so that's why even if we make a mistake as leaders in the church, we need to fix that quick too. Come clean on that really, really fast. The longer you pretend like it's not and you didn't and you deflect, it's just going to be bigger. It's that simple. So we just have a commitment to always try to deal with any potential division or divisive thing as quickly as possible. And then 4E, the thing that's preventative as far as elders and shepherding, it's constantly imparting the truth, right? So we watch ourselves, we watch the flock, we watch external problems, we watch internal problems, but the best solution to all of that is encouraging godliness and humility and love and just, always promoting those types of things, which is why even as a church, we're more committed to the idea of saying, hey, we want to make sure we're preaching the Bible and teaching the Bible as opposed to just doing series that are kind of good advice-based series and that's it, like marriage and parenting and communication and money and kind of wash, rinse, and repeat. We're like, no, we're always trying to think in terms of how do we disciple one another in the process of being Christians in the current climate of things. So any questions on any of that then? Pretty easy stuff. Another thing that elders do is, number 5, elders pray over the sick. We find that in James. And what's cool about that, the James passage is a personal favorite of mine. Because it says, if anyone is sick among you, you must call for the elders of the church, and they are to pray over him, anointing him with the oil in the name of the Lord. It says, and the prayer offered in faith will restore the one who is sick, and the Lord will raise him up if he has not committed sins, and they will be forgiven of him. And then it kind of concludes with the effective prayer of a righteous man can accomplish much. Different people have different thoughts on this. I actually believe that the elders of a church really should be truly righteous men. They really should have lives where privately they don't have sin and garbage, and publicly they're as consistent with their faith as they would be privately, and at home they're as much the Christian as they are at church on Sunday morning, and all of that. And that righteousness is something God factors in how he handles prayer and answering prayer. So in that sense, we'd say elders should be very godly men, and therefore their prayer should be uniquely effective. And in that sense, it gives an impetus on why elders want to be righteous and remain pure and be godly men, so they can be effective in the context of prayer for people in the church. Some people would say, oh, that doesn't seem right, but it's like, like God shouldn't factor in greater obedience means more potent prayer life. And I go, I didn't write it. I just get to share it. It's just what it says. And on the flip, like the 1 Peter 3 passage, I think, 3, 7, and 8, if a husband is not dwelling with his wife with understanding and honor, it says, what? His prayers are hindered, right? So, on the other side of it, unrighteousness hinders prayers. Righteousness makes prayers more robust and active in a way that I don't fully understand. So all the more elders should be righteous because they're called on to pray for their people, and their prayers are just more effective and potent when they're righteous. So it's kind of a symbiotic relationship in there with that. So number 6, elders admonish, encourage, and help with patience. This passage in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. It's all kind of filled in for you, so that's by design. You can go through that maybe at your leisure if you want to. But this passage in 1 Thessalonians, this is early in the deployment of local churches. Thessalonica was one of the earlier churches, certainly one of the earliest churches Paul wrote to. if not the earliest church Paul wrote to. And so, leadership was still kind of early on or in its infancy in some ways with that. But I love this whole discussion that Paul has here about here's what is to happen. Here's the relationship between congregation and leadership in the church. So he tells the church, but we request of you, brethren, that you would appreciate those who diligently labor among you, have charge over you in the Lord, and give you instruction, that you esteem them very highly in love because of their work, live at peace with one another. And then we urge you, brethren, this would be to the leaders. The first half was to the congregants. The second half was to the leaders. We urge you, brethren, admonish the unruly, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, be patient with everyone. See that no one repays another evil for evil, but always seek that which is good for one another and for all people. All of that, like I said, just sort of unpacks below, kind of giving a little bit of commentary to each of those things. But it just has this well-rounded thing, again, that shows the symbiotic nature between the church and leaders. It's not like the leaders are over the church. Leaders have a responsibility to the church, but the church has a responsibility to the leaders, and it's mutual service and responsibility in that. And so these are all things that they're supposed to do. So the church says, man, we appreciate that you guys work hard, and man, we know that you have charge over us in the Lord. That's your job, and we want to welcome your instruction, but at the same time, leaders are to give instruction. We're to admonish people that are unruly, and we're to encourage people who are small-souled. That's the word faint-hearted. Help those who are weak, financially weak, morally weak, spiritually weak. We come alongside them and help them. Go to page 99. We're to be patient with everyone. Can I tell you, as leaders in the church, it's easy to do one of two things. Get frustrated that people aren't moving at the pace you want, or it's easy to use people as opposed to encourage and shepherd people. And so just that idea of be patient with everyone is a critical thing for leaders in the church to be aware of. And then see that no one repays evil for evil, but always seek after that which is good for one another and for all people. Church splits and stupid debates and gossip and all those things. Leaders need to be on top of that and say, wait, do the right thing. Don't do the personal thing. Do the godly thing. So that's what they're to do. Number 7, elders appoint elders and train future leaders. Elders appoint elders and train future leaders. Now, again, our way of appointing them at redemption is a process, and 100% agreement. Then 90% or more of the membership affirms that as well. But then we also are to train future leaders. From this, 7a is the means of appointing an elder. So in Acts, we see that there was this sense in which, at least commissioning Barnabas and Saul, there was worship and fasting and prayer and laying on of hands. Kind of the way we do it as elders is, we have people go through Praxis, we talk with them and interview them, and then we're praying about that. But then when they're commissioned by the church, we lay hands on them and pray for them, and the church acknowledges that publicly and everything else. And so that's kind of the means of that process. 7b is the sobriety in appointing an elder. Right? 1 Timothy 5:22, do not lay hands on an elder too hastily and thereby share responsibility for the sins of others. Keep yourself free from sin. This is why we have a process again. We don't want to just rush right into it and say, this guy's awesome. Why not? He's been here for 6 weeks. It'd be cool. We go, no, this is an important thing, a sobering thing that we do. And so that's why we go to the lengths that we do in the process. And it's just always going to be important to us. Number 8, elders protect, rebuke, and remove fellow elders. Later in one of the modules, we'll get into the fact that elders are also charged with dealing with church discipline in the church, just in general with members and congregants. But uniquely, there is a process in which the elders are accountable to other elders when it comes to accusations that are brought against an elder, sins of an elder, and what they're supposed to do with that. And on both fronts. So I can think about a time that we had one of our elders was accused of something. And it's very easy to want to jump to it, like, oh, somebody's coming in and saying this elder did X, And what this particular case was, this person said this elder chewed me out and didn't act godly at all and was totally in my face and everything else. And so we're like, okay. So we went to the elder and said, did this happen? They're like, no, not at all. I was just explaining. It was just And the person was a little wing nutty anyway, and they're not around anymore, so I can probably say that. But they were a little wing nutty and that kind of thing. So we went back to them and we said, well, do you have any witnesses to this accosting thing? Well, no, it was just me and them. And we said, well, this passage here says you need to have 2 or 3 witnesses. I mean, I can't just go off of, we need an eyewitness, not a friend you told. We need an eyewitness, 2 to 3 eyewitnesses that says, we saw they did this. And if not, we're not even supposed to entertain this. That's what it tells us then as a team of elders. We don't even entertain your accusation without witnesses. And there's real value in that. Now, at the same time, if there are witnesses, if something's happened, by God's grace, I've never been in a church environment where we had to remove an elder, but I've been connected to people that have had to do that. In that case, let's say the elder's having an affair, and it's clear and everything else. Even if that elder repents, like I did it, I confess it was wrong. As a church, the way we would handle something like that is we would still go to the congregation and say, this elder's being removed, this was their offense, right? They're repentant, but we're still publicly letting you know this. There's 2 reasons for it. One is this here. The way we say it is, an elder is an example in their sin as much as in their righteousness. You're going to be an example either way, right? So, in the case of an elder who sins, basically what it talks about is you let everyone know so that they all go, whoa, wait, I don't want to do that. That they become the negative example, Even if they're repentant, you still let the church know this is what happened. And people go, wow, I'm learning from that. I don't want that to happen in my life. That's one part of it. The other part is if you remove an elder but you don't say why, where there is no story, one will be created, right? And so if you're like, well, we're not saying it's just a personal whatever, we don't have to give the nitty and gritty stuff, but we need to say there was marital unfaithfulness. This is why this person's not an elder. There was financial impropriety. This is why this person's not an elder. I mean, we have to say it so that A, people go, I don't want to do what they did, and B, so that they don't create a story that isn't the story. So it even kind of protects the person, the elder that's being removed. And they can't be, can't have their story, spun up into 17 different things that they did wrong. Just really kind of gets to the cut of this is what they did. So in that sense, we are, verse 20, rebuking in the presence of all that the rest will also fear of sinning. That's kind of the way we do that. So any questions on any of that, whether it be appointment or on protect, rebuke, and remove elders? Also, really quick before I maybe do that, there's going to be some things you don't remove an elder for, but you do confront them on, and that's gray area, honestly. You can maybe ask me of examples. I could tell you what I think is a removal versus a rebuke. I think about the guy that I served under back in Spokane, where they found out that he used the church credit card to buy like $400 of personal stuff. And then they confronted him and he denied it, and they confronted him again and he denied it, and they showed him the bill and then he admitted it. And they removed him. And he was the teaching founding pastor of the church. And there was always discussion of, well, should they have removed him or should they have rebuked him? And, and it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, you got to have that discussion. And it was interesting. You might appreciate this a little bit at least. So this was the guy that had been John MacArthur's associate pastor, trained by John MacArthur, everything else. The church removes this pastor for the $400 indiscretion, and MacArthur rebuked the elders and said they shouldn't have removed him. He felt it was a rebukable offense, but it wasn't a removing offense. So even somebody as hardcore as MacArthur looked at that and was like, nah, I don't think you should have removed him, but you should have rebuked him.
An authority over the other elders at the other local church?
No, but...
I didn't know he was like...
No, well, he was a practical authority. It was John. Yeah, And he's like, yeah, that wasn't a removable offense. It was a rebukable offense, but it wasn't a removable offense. But the church was like, no, that's totally removable. And he's got 6 weeks of pay and he's gone. I mean, it was like hardcore, man. But that was also the monster that pastor had created in that church. They were very harsh with people, and now it was harsh with him. So, yeah, that was interesting, that particular event. So, yeah.
So when it says don't receive an accusation unless there's 2 or 3 Let's say I saw an elder leaving a hotel room with a woman. I was the only one. Can you have cumulative witnesses, so to speak, where you go to the elder and say, this is what I saw, obviously can't do anything with it, and then wait for maybe another. How would you go about that?
Right.
You know?
Yeah, especially in the modern climate, there's all kinds of weird kind of what ifs. Honestly,
I think you tweeted. Yeah. Photographic evidence.
photographic evidence counts as eyewitness accounting. No, but I think if somebody said, I saw this, I think you do go talk to the elder. I would say you go talk to them. And if they, they're like, absolutely not, and everything else, like, you know what, then you got to realize that looks wonky. I mean, you can have those conversations. What you'll find more often than not, there's a lot of just he said, she said disagreement issues that it's safe to say, no, we need multiple witness of a true sin. Yeah. But I think something like that is scandalous enough. Yeah. Depending on what it was. Like I had somebody one time, wasn't an elder in our church, but there was a man in our church and a woman in our church saw this man with another woman out someplace. And she's like, I'm telling you, he's having an affair and da-da-da-da-da and all this stuff to me. Well, I saw the same occurrence, same guy, same woman, and my narrative is, he was having coffee. I mean, it was so innocent looking to me. But to this other person, it looked like this guy's trying to have an affair, And so sometimes, too, you just have to gather the facts a little bit more on something that's kind of scandalous like that. Because in part, somebody's now being accused of something scandalous. Yeah. You would do well at least to inquire at some level.
Well, let's say I did see them having an affair.
And it's just one of you?
Just me.
Right. I think if it's...
Would elder, would you not even...
Yeah, no, I still would. I mean, I know it says 2, 3.
Well, you've got the person he was having an affair with.
Co-witness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And because what I found in circumstances like that, so like the pastor of the church I went to as a high school student was having actually multiple affairs, but there was no eyewitness until one person kind of suspected, and that guy hired a private investigator, and that person became ultimately the eyewitness. So there was suspicion, concern, question, denial, something was still fishy, and they hired an eyewitness. Private investigator. That's the answer now.
Yeah.
Isn't that good to know? So, but it was that thing of he was doing it, and actually when it was all said and done, he finally admitted he had affairs with 16 different women in the church over a 5-year period. God was busy. And this is more like, just bad stories for churches. Oh, no. I mean, and he had been removed from a church historically for infidelity. And was out for like 10 years and then came back. And there was one of the gals they had an affair with in the church, they couldn't have kids, like the husband and wife for like 10 years and everything else. And then she gets pregnant with the pastor's child. And the pastor gets up there and he's like, it's a miracle of God. This family hasn't been, threw that whole thing down. This is a great miracle. God has opened her womb. Da-da-da-da-da. Yeah, I know. It was insane. It was insane, man. That blew up a month after I moved here. Yeah.
Was that the same guy you saw having coffee?
No, totally different thing. You're like, hey, Matt, I don't know how to break this to you. So you're not real discerning, are you, Boswell? Oh, wait, and she's the pregnant. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, I got issues. So no, totally different thing. But anyway, others on that. No, good enough for me. Number 9 then, top of page 100. Elders who lead, preach, and teach well are worthy of financial support. We got into that with the 1 Timothy 5, 17, and 18. That's just since we're looking at all these other things. That's why we, as far as different things we have with elders, some elders are lay, some elders are pay. That's the passage that kind of talks about that. Also, Galatians 6:6, I think it is, if I remember right, has something about sharing with those who teach you. Number 10, what's true of elders is elders possess authority and expect accountability from God and Jesus. So Hebrews 13:17, obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are the ones who keep watch over your souls as those who will give an account. Let them do this with joy and not grief, for this would be unprofitable for you. So going back ways, again, I'm giving you guys reference points. So it goes back to at Duval Church, senior pastor, board of stewards, trustees, and then members. And that all of these had this balance of power effect to them. And so one of the challenges when we went from that balance of power to kind of an eldership model is people are like, well, wait, though, elders could then abuse power and do this and do that. And we had to go to this Hebrews 13:17 and say, but this is just the way Jesus has built it. Obey your leaders and submit to them. So instead of it being what they kind of felt was the members were the most powerful force over the board of stewards, and in some ways the most powerful force over the senior pastor. They could vote and remove him at any time. They could vote and remove them at any time. They could do an active vote to remove at any time they wanted. It makes it very hard then for the Bible's admonition of these two groups have authority over these people if these people can remove these people anytime they get angry, right? And so we had to talk through that a lot with people, but this passage was kind of the central passage on that. Like, this is just how it's wired, right? Obey your leaders and submit to them. And people are like, well, then what keeps those leaders honest in their authority? And the response is then the James 3:1, they're held accountable by Jesus. Now, some people are like, well, we need earthly powers to do that. Yeah, and what's Jesus going to do? And it's like, well, Jesus is going to see them face to face one day and deal with them. And so in that sense, the structure is a structure of faith. The congregation has to go, Jesus, I trust you. If you're the senior pastor, I trust you to deal with these leaders if they're being foolish or stupid or sinful or whatever else. And so in that sense, they do have authority, but there's also accountability that's expected for what they do. And you just have to say, Jesus, please take them to the woodshed or do whatever you need to do, because I'm trusting you that you put lampstands there and you remove lampstands and that kind of thing. And we might say, well, that can't happen. But I do think Marcel's a good example of that. For good or bad, we look and go, too big to fail wasn't true. The leadership got out of balance and resisted the senior pastor being Jesus to do the right thing. And Jesus is like, I'll just kill it. I'll kill it. So Jesus is involved in his church. He may not always be involved in the timeline we want. Sometimes it may be a few years before he removes a leader or changes something. But that's Israel in the Old Testament, man. So God's patient with his plans and that kind of thing. So we then as congregants just go, I trust you. And I know even as an elder before in a previous environment back at Indian Trail in Spokane, we had an elder that was really destructive, and we couldn't just remove him because he was a lay elder. It wasn't the same as a paid elder that you can remove and all that stuff. And it just had to be Jesus. We'll let you take care of it. It took about 18 months, but eventually it kind of came to a point where that person was like, "Yep, it's time for me to go now," and that kind of thing. And so sometimes I, even as an elder, have to submit to a system or a structure or an authority, and let the Holy Spirit work in that. So it's true for all of us. And then last, number 11, elders partner with and oversee deacons. Again, nothing new, but again, we're just talking about what they do in the local church. Partner with and oversee. Philippians 1:1, to the saints in Christ Jesus who are at Philippi with the overseers and deacons. So you see that there was a partnership, and then from there we just unpacked what those differences were in the partnership. So any last questions? If not, we'll be done a little early tonight, and then next time, in 2 weeks, we'll get into all of the qualities and qualifications of elders and deacons. But that gives us kind of the skeletal aspects of eldership in the New Testament church. So, any last lingering somethings? Andrew?
I was just thinking, so in the protect and rebuke part, so if you remove an elder, obviously bring it before the congregation, rebuke them. If it's a not removable issue, let's say the $400 credit card bill, would you still bring that before the congregation?
I think you should.
And
Yeah.
Just
Yeah, I really think you should.
say it's not removed, but
Yeah.
just the,
Yep. And there's, like I said, I think there's more than one reason for it. But I think that's, I go back to, everything teaches. And as an elder, you're saying, you walk into it knowing you're under scrutiny, and you walk into it knowing this passage in 1 Timothy 5. I mean, if you're in an environment that takes eldership seriously, you know you're going in there, and if you do something that's either removable or rebukable, it's going to be public. You knew that signing the contract, in essence.
But 1 Timothy 5 says that those who continue in sin you should rebuke. It doesn't say those who sin you should rebuke.
Right. Well, and this is where I'm going to bring it back to, I think in the current climate, there is value in exposure versus hiding. So I would agree that if somebody is an unrepentant, that's more particular to this. I think there's an extension principle that's helpful. I mean, I wouldn't say like, so I saw Scott get mad and, give somebody the bird on 520. Oh, now we're going to bring him up on, I'm not.
Just have a section in the bulletin.
That's right. But I think there are things, particularly, I think there are things that are scandalous enough within the culture that you're better to do the exposure side of it than you are the hide it side of it, even if it's simply rebukable. And again, I've not experienced the need for that. You know what I mean? By God's grace, there hasn't been something with an elder where I went, well, we got to make that one public or whatever else. I mean, there may be things and I just don't know what they are, but.
How are you, and maybe it's just, how are you discerning rebuke versus remove, and without rank? Because isn't sin sin? I mean, are you ranking sin?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you are, and I don't even think there's a science behind it. Like I think there's a nuance behind it. So, for example, like in our culture, we'd be pretty slow to remove an elder for anger. We probably should sometimes, but we'd be slow to do it because we're like, they're just a driven leader. It's what they are. It's just their personality. Da, 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 da. But in some cultures, in like the Middle Eastern cultures of churches, anger is like one of the worst sins. Like it's almost worse than adultery in some environments. So for them, they'd be like, angry elder, you remove that guy instantly. Where here we'd be like, an angry elder, well, we should talk to him some, or whatever else, right? So in some ways, I think those remove versus rebuke things are nuanced by what the culture sees as more or less scandalous, honestly. Money issues, scandalous. Sexual issues, scandalous. Things with kids, scandalous and illegal. So there's things that we're going to say, if it kind of, it's a little subjective, but if it's something at a level where we go, that just needs to be a removal issue, then that's what you do. Versus, no, that one's just a rebukable issue, and that's what you do. A one-time deception, rebukable. Multiple deceptions, probably remove, right? So it's subjective to a certain degree. And that doesn't change that, all sin is sin, but not all sin has the same consequence. And I think you are looking at saying, what is the consequence that may be associated with this too? Right. And what is the consequence to the church, or what is the consequence to individuals? You just have to factor all of that in when we're trying to discern that. And then when you have a plural eldership that's making unanimous decisions, they have to come to a unanimous agreement, like this is how we're going to handle this. There's probably a lowest common denominator in there, but you may have some saying remove and some rebuke. Honestly, in that, I don't know, I hope I never have to face that. Honestly, because I'm like, I don't know what the lowest common denominator. What's the most conservative thing? Is it rebuke or remove? I don't know. Yeah. So that's where I'd have to trust the Holy Spirit would give some discernment on that. Because I go to the guy back in Spokane that they removed for $400. I go, I wouldn't have removed him.
But is that just because you're trying to keep your streak alive?
That's right. That's right. So trying to make sure. We've never removed anybody. Yeah, they were at a brothel in Taiwan, but whatever, I mean. It was out of the States. And it was only one time, and there was no eyewitnesses. The video footage is grainy. Yeah, no, I'm not. Yeah, so, that would be tougher. But the consequence of sin is different than, you can look at that and say, clearly, there's some things we know that's more wrong. All sin is sin, but some sins we just go, we all know that's more wrong. And that's going to have a negative consequence on a church and on the people of a church to blow that off.
Go ahead, Tim.
I was just going to say, isn't part of the way we evaluate this by looking at the qualifications and saying, this is a sin that is, specifically called out as, an elder can't, infidelity or money stuff, like that's specifically called out. But then there are other things where it's like an elder needs to be beyond reproach and well thought of by outsiders, and so that would be where more of the cultural thing comes in.
Yeah, well, because that's where there's a subjectivity to it, especially that, above reproach in the eyes of those outside. Well, now you're talking about, well, what does outside judge is above and not above reproach? Because outside
doesn't seem to like you very much now.
Right, but that's where it gets a little stickier in my mind. You know what I mean? So, you were going to say something there, Travis?
Well, no, I think it's all. I think what helps me is the understanding that there is that continuing in sin, like Tim talked about, and then I guess I was listening to the number 7 that you had put out earlier. Is sent out via email, and you're talking about just the different, the closed hand and the open fist, or the closed fist and the open hand, and trying to make sense of how you would draw from Scripture to help you make that distinction between rebuke and remove.
Right.
And I think you can get that through what they're called to do, and you also get that by a mix of your doctrine and how you deal with the culture at large, so that you are even-handed and with the belief that the Spirit will guide that. I think with that, it helps me.
Yeah, and it is. It's like I say, it's more of a stew, as opposed to a slab of meat. Because I think there's a lot of factors in there. I think even you might find that you could have the same offense, but there may be 2 different levels of rebuke depending on how. If the person says, "Yeah, I did it, whatever," I did it, was stupid, I know, let's just move on, versus the person that's truly grieved over it.
Right.
So I think even those are just all these nuances that come in.
It's easier to overlook that $400 if he just says, "I'm really sorry and I can't."
Yeah,
believe it,"
that was stupid, and I'm going to pay it back, and all that stuff. Versus,
that.
I didn't. Damn you, I didn't.
Deny,
Oh, there's the bill.
Counter-accuse, deny.
Right.
That's how it works.
That's right. So yeah. So and that's where again I think all those are all those dynamics that come into play. What you don't want to do, and I've not really ever seen this, but I could see it happening. Is you could have somebody on an elder team that you want to get rid of, so you try to kind of frame them, not in a nefarious way, but it's like you never get along with people, you never want, and you just got to keep the politics stuff out of it too, and just really try to be as concrete as possible. And I would say we would probably, as a church, err more on the side of grace than we would rigidity. Sins are sins, but I think there's some things where we could overreact to it. Again, the case in the point of the guy that was removed completely when I think he should have just been rebuked. That was just zeal gone too far, and created 10 years of absolute division and chaos in that church. It took 10 years before they ever had peace from that action. So none of it was healthy. The removal wasn't healthy, the process wasn't healthy, and the aftermath wasn't healthy. So it missed the very point of what it was designed to do, which is restoration or acknowledgement of offense and how the gospel heals that. Like, that wasn't there. It just became like this legalism fest of bizarreness, and people were just at odds and stayed ugly for a long time. So, yep. All right, people. Well, it is 20:53 according to my watch. So for those military time people, But next time we'll be going through the qualities of elders, and then from there we'll start to get into more kind of, I don't know what you call them, things like counseling and disciplines, and a little bit more practicalized stuff and some of that too. So it'll be good. So I'm going to have Andrew actually pray. Why not? You're a church planner, man. You probably, and you're foreign on the field, so you're probably more righteous and godly than I am. Your life's at risk, so
Yeah, just thank you for this time that we can get together and just study your word and have that teach us, not just what the Bible has to say, but just kind of what Redemption Church, what their views are, what their philosophy is, and what the vision is. It's just really cool to sit through this all and just hear all the questions people have, and just see different viewpoints, and just see all the different views that we have, but we're all one. We're all under you. and pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, everybody. So you know what you're going to be doing, right? Once you come on.
I'm gonna have to do the review.
You'll be the heavy. Oh, Eric's already jumping back there on that. You and I are in the same camp on that because I've never ever touched that thing.
Unplug it, take the battery out.